Hello and welcome to Democratic Capitalism, a production of Mount Wachusett Community College. I'm Professor Michael Greenwood, Business and Economics Professor, and my guest today is Ray Carey, author of the book Democratic Capitalism, The Way to a World of Peace and Plenty. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Mike.
Ray, you know, this week we were reading about the life of another famous author, Kurt Vonnegut. And in his life, he was asked a question at one point, and they said, why do you write what you write? And Kurt Vonnegut said, we all must write that which is inside of us. Ray, what was inside of you when you wrote this book? What were you thinking?
I think it was a feeling, Mike, that from the time I grew up in Gardner and played football in the high school until 18 years as the head of ADT, I had found a couple of very simple principles. One, you organize based on the worth and potential of each person, and you try to create an environment of trust and cooperation. It works on a football team. It worked at ADT, which became, a fabulous company.
Yes.
To give you a little feeling of it, when we wrote and put in place the ownership plan, profit-sharing plan for the workers, employees, associates, we had a contest. And a lady in Detroit said, I think the name of it should be Care and Share. And I think
nice.
That really captured it. So
captured the human side of enterprise.
Exactly. But the human side, but the conclusion that I had is that in every single human association, performance improves with trust and cooperation.
I see, yes.
And when I retired, I couldn't understand if that seemed as clear and obvious as it was to me at that time, why that wasn't the simple, obvious way for families, for companies, for states, for nations, for the world, for that matter.
And that gave you the inspiration to capture this into a book at this point.
Exactly.
When did you write the book, Ray?
It was published in 2004. But I'm a slow writer. It took me about 10 years to finish it.
God love you.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ray. You grew up in Gardner.
Grew up in Gardner. I'm quite proud that I was the president of the class, co-captain of the football team at the Holy Cross, in the Navy for 2 years, Scholastic Honor Society, and went on to Harvard Business School. But whenever I mention that, I quickly mention that I learned more on the Gardner football team than I did at Harvard Business School, but don't tell anybody I said that.
So you went to a small business school in the Northeast.
Right.
I understand. Okay. The notion of your book, did you have a framework in mind when you set out to write your book? Was there any type of guiding principles that inspired you to write the book?
Well, I had no agenda and I had no political bias. I'm about as perfectly down the middle as you could be. Had in Gardner my parents, just a fabulous start. My mind was perhaps, what's the Latin expression, tabula rasa or vice versa. Yeah. So it sounds pretentious to say it, but I was just trying to find out the truth of the question that I posed to myself. If it's that obvious that performance improves in trust and cooperation, why isn't that the way that things work?
And you found that to work successfully for you when you were an executive with ADT.
Well, I found it, I was fortunate to start early. I was a 28-year-old plant manager of a very unsuccessful company in Bayonne, New Jersey. And I started there, and then later I was president of that operation. So there are two things that are emphasized. They're put up, economic freedom can feed, clothe, shelter the world, and economic common purpose can stop the violence, unite people and stop the violence. Well, my experience was very relevant because at Electrodynamic, this rather broken down company, suddenly became an industry leader. I won't take credit for that. I was lucky. I had a genius named Harry Shapiro there, and he was the designer of these motors that really brought us, but I at least helped create the environment. So I saw how releasing the people, they really had been the wage slaves of the Industrial Revolution, and just to open the windows, paint the buildings, create a feeling of freedom, and along with Shapiro's
you sound like
genius.
Your lessons from business and life is that you believe in that people will achieve their best potential.
Absolutely.
You're,
Just give
you're a
them the
glass
right
half full kind
circumstances.
of guy, aren't
Right?
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I can sense that talking to you.
But then later on, the whole company burnt down in 1963. All 14 buildings, including the buildings where they built President Kennedy's PT-109. So we had to get together at my home in Rumson the next morning and look at each other and say, how do you rebuild a complicated business? And we did. So when I talk about economic common purpose, I've been there. This was, in a local situation.
Yes, sure.
But the principles and the passion and the commitment and the performance are the same at any level.
So your book is, in a way, it captures a lot of the learning in your life, but expresses it in terms of economic principles that people can understand and use in their daily lives. Earlier you mentioned the notion of economic freedom, I think you said, which would help to eliminate conflict and wars in the world. How do you see that happening? I think that our viewers would find that compelling to think about, geez, economics is something I studied in college, and now how can I relate that to making the world a more peaceful place?
Well, the best way I could explain that is to look at the European Union.
Okay.
There were more stupid wars in Europe. I mean, the ground was really bloodied
Sure.
with millions and millions of young people's lives in very stupid wars, and they finally said enough, and it took a while, and it's less than a perfect institution, but the European Union exists, and the stupid wars have stopped. I think that's one example.
Some people would say that customers don't pick fights with each other. So would you say that right?
Yeah, very good. That's true.